An abandoned German village has become a climate flashpoint. Eco-activists, among them Greta Thunberg, have been caught in a standoff with police in an attempt to stop the tiny village from being demolished to make way for a lignite coal mine. Lignite is the dirtiest type of coal, which itself is the most polluting fossil fuel. But starved for energy after turning off the tap on Russian gas, Germany argues it needs to return to coal despite its climate goals. As scientists' predictions get grimmer and grimmer, how do governments keep environmental promises in an economic crisis? Are doomsday predictions effective in convincing the people and those in power? Is there a right way to protest? Is it too late to save the planet?
So let's get to it. Is it too late to save the planet? As always, we begin with our quick fire round, 30 seconds each to lay out your initial stance on the matter, and we'll pick up the debate from there. So Daria Sututa, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on. Daria, can you hear us? Yeah.
Yes.
Please.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So I think that the consequences of the climate crisis are already existent. And that is exactly why we have to, or especially the political leaders have to limit these consequences. And that means limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees.
Okay, Ralph Schulhammer, your take?
The planet will still be around in 10 years. It will still be around in 10 million years. The question is, can we create the conditions that as many people as possible can live in as good conditions as possible? And if we want to accomplish this in line with climate change goals, we must ensure that as many people get wealthier, get more prosperous as quick as possible.
So it's not a question of the planet, but rather humanity living in it. Interesting. Hila Etkin, last but not least, your take?
The planet will be here in 10 years. The question is, what is the quality of life that we're going to have? If the climate temperature will rise above 1.5 Celsius, we will add at least 100 million people to poverty. If we look at this globally, we have to make sure we take care of the most susceptible populations in Africa, East Africa.
Okay, and on that note, let's please feel free to interact from this point onwards, and let's circle back to the World Economic Forum in Davos. More than a third of the scores of panels at the Davos Rendezvous has to do with climate change or climate crisis, and yet private jets are still a topic for many of the attendees. Is Davos a greenwashing machine, so to speak? Ralph?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's the topic du jour, right? The climate activism is kind of the new ideology of the elites. It's kind of the new belief systems. It's a quasi-religion, and I don't begrudge them those. Like, everybody looks for meaning in their life, so wherever they find it, good for them. The question is, what is the consequence for everybody else? And I would like to point something else, as was just said, about the effects of climate change on poverty. Let's be absolutely clear about this. We know the richer people get, the more they care about the climate. So if the global population on average gets wealthier, more people will care about the climate, and it will be easier to meet whatever the climate goals might gonna be. And the biggest obstacle to wealth in Africa, in Asia, is a lack of access to energy. And one of the main reasons why energy is so scarce in these areas is because many green policies avoids them from getting them, right? Africa is not allowed to use its gas. The World Bank is not funding nuclear energy, which is particularly when it comes to emissions, one of the best ways to produce electricity in this case. And the same is true in Asia. So you want people to care about the climate, make sure that they get wealthier. You want them to get wealthier, give them access to energy, and the climate solutions will follow on their own.
So will going green just make the already rich richer, Hila?
Going green will not make the rich richer. We need to transform the world economy. I said it before, at speed and scale more urgent than ever before. In the short term, actually, when we put successful climate policies, like a price of carbon, renewable portfolio standard, the rich will not get richer. We actually get more balance between the rich and the poor countries, because we're going to have to produce less and consume less. As population grow, and the quality of life increase, GDP increase, we produce more and we pollute more. And that has to stop in order for us to not get to 1.5 warming above pre-industrial levels.
But Daria, maybe the phrasing, the framing of the debate as a battle between the poor and the rich is doing the campaign or the battle objective some injustice. Is it that bad that going green will mean to make money?
No, not necessarily, I'd say. I think, first of all, there are also many not privileged people and groups who were fighting for against the climate crisis for decades, but they just haven't been seen and visible through media. And for example, Fridays for Future in Europe became really visible and widespread, but that is more of an imbalance in the media. And in addition, I would say we should rather have a look on the reason of the climate crisis, and that also explains, in my opinion, why people who are rather wealthy are more willing to fight against the climate crisis, because it has been framed as a topic for wealthy intellectual people, but that is actually not the fact, because the climate crisis will make injustice, social injustice worse.
And Ralph, isn't it to an extent like the first phase of COVID, as in sacrificing the economy for public health back in the days, and then this switcheroo? Question being, how can governments keep their climate-related policies during an economic crisis? Isn't it sacrificing people's current lives for the sake of something that will or will not happen in the future?
No, there are two things. The one is if the idea is that we're going to reach the climate goals by making people poorer, it's only a matter of time until people will revolt. Like telling poor people that their life will get more miserable for the good of the planet, this is not going to work, and we're going to see this very soon. And secondly, which is even more important, I don't think that this is true at all. Look at some of the most advanced economies in the world. Look at Sweden, look at Denmark, look at Ontario, particularly as a province of Canada. So same in the UK. Most advanced economies have completely decoupled GDP growth from CO2 emissions. So, I mean, no offense, but it is simply factually not true that we have to reduce growth in order to reduce CO2 emissions. Like the numbers show. Norway, another example. Sweden is the best one. If you get your energy, if you get your electricity, let's say from nuclear and hydropower, you can have a very low carbon grid and still produce a lot. The problem is, and let's talk about this maybe as well, that some of the solutions the green movement or the climate movement doesn't want to talk about, and nuclear is the biggest one of them. There is no way to decarbonize the grid, to decarbonize electricity production without nuclear. So as long as you're against nuclear, you'll end up with coal. If you end up with coal, you will end up with higher emissions. So it's one or the other. It can't be both.
Hila, you're listening to Ralph here. Is the way to get truly green goes through nuclear power?
That's one option, but we do have a lot of other technologies that we are developing. If it's transitioning from coal and gas economy to renewable energy, but we need government funds for that. We need government support for that. If you take Israel, for example, Israel, startup nation, we have the most startups per capita, but as far as adopting new technologies, we fail. Why? Because the competition in the market does not allow new and greener technologies to really penetrate the market. It's not competitive if we do the cost-benefit analysis. And this is why leaders should lead and put policies in place to motivate inventors and existing technologies into the market.
And the flip side of it, Daria, recycling, counting your carbon footprint, going vegan, how much does personal action really matter? And if I may be more blunt, are companies trying to push the blame for climate change on individuals?
Yes, definitely. I would also agree with Hila that we need a legal framework that has to be set by governments. And I think that the focus when we were talking about climate crisis has been set on individual action for too long, and also especially by companies. Like the first carbon footprint calculator that was online was created by or funded by a company, and I think this is one of the main reasons why climate activism has become something academic and privileged, as you say. And this is the injustice, and I think what we in our movement also fight for is that there is a global injustice also in wealth, and that we do not only fight for fighting against the climate crisis, but also against economic imbalances, which are all rooted in a system that is based on profit.
And we will be diving in further into the climate protest rationale in the second part of our debate. But as we conclude the first part of our conversation, Ralph, the war in Ukraine obviously overturned the energy market. Can we expect any coherent climate policy to be made until this war is over and the markets, steer in a certain direction?
Well, I'm not sure, because I think, and I'm very grateful for this, because I think Daria kind of, if I may use your first name, I think she made a wonderful point, right? That she said it's not just about the climate, it's about, ideas of justice, about changing the system. And again, that's a fine idea, but I think we have to be honest about this. So it is not just about climate. That's a completely different debate. And this debate has, I feel, kind of, sneaked into the climate question, because the climate issues could be solved. I agree also with Hila, right? The technological solutions would be there. But we have already moved on. Now we say, yeah, we have the technological solutions for climate, but there is the much bigger question of justice. And again, that's fine by me. But I get very queasy and uneasy when I hear schemes of global redistribution and global justice, because very often, and I don't begrudge any of my previous speakers that, but this has to me kind of very often I sense a lot of state intervention. I sense a lot of authoritarian state action, and that's, to be honest, I know where these things very often tend to end, and this is something I want to avoid. Is it about the climate, or is it about the system?
And on that point exactly, we will take a very short break, but Ralph Scholhammer, Daria Sutude, and Hila Etkin, you're staying with us as we continue our conversation right after it, so do not go anywhere. A few minutes break, and we're back. Welcome back to the summit. Still with us, Hila Etkin, Ralph Scholhammer, and Daria Sutude. Thank you all so very much for staying with us. We're also staying on topic, but before we continue our conversation, let's take a listen to some global leaders addressing the issue of climate, or as the UN chief has dubbed it, our flirt with crises.
We are flirting with climate disaster. Every week brings a new climate horror story. Greenhouse gas emissions are at record levels and growing. The commitment to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees is nearly going up in smoke.
So how do we get there? Well, the lesson I've learned in the last years, and I learned it as secretary, and I've learned it since, reinforced in spades, is money, 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 money. And I'm sorry to say that. I mean, yes, technology, yes, exciting new initiatives, yes, organizing, winning races politically. I mean, what happened in the midterms in the United States is nothing less than miraculous. And it happened because young people voted. And the second most voted issue was climate.
So let's get to it. Another quick for around 30 seconds each. John Kerry saying the younger generation voting because of climate, maybe only because of climate, which brings us to wonder, is green the new black? As in, is climate becoming merely just a hot political talking point? Hila Etkin, please take the lead. Your 30 seconds are on.
Thank you, Ali. During the pandemic, young Australian voted that they care more about climate change than the pandemic, and that was in 2020 and 2021.
Wow.
In the midst of the pandemic, young people, it's no longer just hypothesis and scientists telling us what will happen in the future. We see today they live it, especially in Australia and California. They live the wildfire, the extreme weather events, the drought. So they see it, and absolutely they care. The green.
Yeah, you're so polite, so punctuous, finishing on time. We don't see that so often on our show. Ralph Scholhammer, your 30 seconds are on.
Yeah, I think it's true. Young people care, definitely young people in the West, but I still think that's not a justification why young people in India, young people in Africa, young people in China should be condemned to live their lives in poverty because people in Europe, the United States, and Canada and Australia think this is highly important.
Darius Atuda.
There are and have been so many climate justice or just climate movements from rather poor countries from the global south, and especially young people or people in those countries suffer even more from the climate crisis and have way less means to protect against the consequences. For example, we have the floods in Pakistan last year. So I don't think that those two issues have to be pitted against each other. And there are several people who are aware that both belong together. And
Daria, I do want to stay with you. Trashing artworks, gluing to roads, and other attention-grabbing tactics, that we will call it that way. Are climate protests reaching a point of being counter-conducive, as in, instead of getting more support, alienating support? The activist dilemma, if you will.
So I would say that especially from Germany, I can say that we have and had a lot of support, and that we keep organizing protests with like 10,000s of people. So the support is there, but we have done that for years or decades, and the governments are still not taking appropriate measures. So I see the point where people think that we have to go further as long as we don't hurt anyone.
Is climate ever going to reach consensus, or will it always be like, gun laws, like abortion, a class of civilization, so to speak, Hila?
We have a consensus on climate. Everybody agrees, scientists overwhelmingly agree that anthropogenic human-made emissions caused climate change. The population agree. The leaders also know what they need to do. The equation is very simple. They put climate target. All they need to do is put budgets, reforms, and policies in order to support those targets. For some reason, they seem to not want to do it, but they know exactly what they need to do.
And to that point, Ralph, are doomsday predictions effective in terms of generating action, or is it just making us all and governments and leaders, and most notably, numb to an extent?
No, I think doomsday predictions are okay, but I think important is what the actual policies are. And please forgive me, but I want to be very clear about this. Due to Europe's failed energy policies, and Germany was on top of these policies, we bought up over the last year every morsel of energy we could. Europe caused shortages, particularly of LNG, in the developing world, from Africa to Pakistan. So people there, Sri Lanka is another example, right, which was a huge ESG problem because they tried to go all green and go all organic. So the third world, or the developing world, whatever term you want to use, is suffering from policies that are explicitly made in the name of climate. Africa is the best example. Just as a point in case, right? Most people in the world, the majority, has access to energy that would be the same that people in Europe had in the year of 1860. And it is climate policies that refuse those people access to more energy, because the first step in energy production is not wind and solar, it's mostly gas, it's partially also coal. And we're refusing people to get access to these energies, and nuclear the most important one, right? To be clear, the World Bank is not funding the development of nuclear energy in countries that would immensely profit from it. So this is just something as a clear consequence directly affecting people. And I'm wondering why, if supposedly this is about global justice and climate justice, that nobody in the climate movement tells their own governments, how is it okay that we have slave labor in China in the production of photovoltaic? Well, how is it okay that we have child labor in the Congo to mine cobalt for wind turbines? Why is this all okay? Why is nobody in the climate movement ever talking about this, which has a direct consequence on the life and the well-being of people in developing countries that is completely ignored? They always come up as a platitude about international justice, but nobody does anything to actually alleviate the suffering they're currently experiencing as a direct consequence of the climate policies of the West.
Daria, would you like to respond maybe?
We actually do. I understand that it hasn't been loud enough, it hasn't been clear enough, but I would say most people in the climate justice movement I know, and also from those affected countries that you were just talking about, they know about these facts and they're having campaigns and they're saying it. But of course, there is still this image that you described, and the media usually cover only topics about, like, individual consumerism and maybe solar energy, and they don't dig deeper. And so I understand that those topics are kind of not really visible, unfortunately, though.
So Hila, as we're looking ahead now, should we expect any change on climate change to come out from Davos or other high-profile meetings? Or let me rephrase my question. What are we waiting to see next?
With all honesty, we are waiting to see politicians to care more about population and about the growing risk from extreme weather events than from their own personal interest and maintaining their personal position. This is what we're waiting for. Because if we're talking about climate justice and technologies, we have technologies today that turn waste into energy. We can put it in Africa, we can put it in Kenya, we have everything in place. We need the policies and we need the funds. The energy crisis in Europe is because the war with Russia, but Germany Green Party with the green policies to phase out coal by 2038 still stands.
So, to differentiate between policy and politics, that appears to be the main problems, no matter what you focus on. And on that note, Daria Sotude, Hila Etkin, and Rolf Schulhammer, thank you so very much for your time and insight tonight. We truly do appreciate it.